And we learned a lot of lessons about scaling those retrofit principles to larger new construction work. And this is when we first had a taste and frankly became more educated on embodied carbon.
Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your questions answered, and contribute to the community dialogue. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our weekly Passive House Accelerator live webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Welcome back to the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh, coming to you from Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland in New Zealand. And we've got Zach on the line. How are you, Zach?
I'm well. How are you doing, Matthew?
Good. And we're joined again this week by Mary. Mary, how are you going?
Great. Nice to see you all. Happy New Year.
Yes. Happy New Year. This is the first recording session for us all back for 2024. So great to have us all back virtually together. And Ilka, how are you?
I'm doing well too. Happy New Year.
Good. All right. Well, we're going to jump into a great interview that Ilka and Mary prepared for us this week, which I really enjoyed listening to. But before we do that, we've got some people to thank, Zach.
Indeed. Big thank you to our sponsors that make everything we do at Passive House Accelerator possible. So thank you to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Glavel, Ingui Architecture, Minitaire, Partel, Rockwell North America, Stocorp, and Zola Windows. Thanks also to our champion sponsors, Bewizo, Gradient, Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, PH Air Seal, Proseco, and Source 2050. And a big shout out to our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority.
Awesome. All right. Well, before we jump into the interview, we're just going to do a quick plug for the exciting event that's coming up now this year, Reimagine 2024. Should we jump straight into the promo, Zach?
Let's do it. Imagine you could learn about 24 of the best buildings solving for climate change, instantly become part of a global movement, and gain the knowledge you need to create real change in what you do every day. Join us for a one-of-a-kind, 24-hour, around-the-world, global online happening, Reimagine Buildings 24. We'll circumnavigate the globe, unveiling a new, innovative building project every hour, complete with actionable solution sets, expert insights, and key lessons learned. We'll connect you with peers from around the world and from your region, so you can build the network you need to create buildings that make a difference. We all know that time is of the essence, that climate change is already here, and that today, too many of our buildings are not only making the problem worse, but also leave us vulnerable to climate extremes that are already here. But that's all changing. A global movement is turning it around, reimagining buildings as resilient and healthy havens, as climate solutions. Tradespeople, builders, architects, engineers, developers, policymakers, and just regular people making it happen on the ground on every continent of our beautiful planet. Join that movement at Reimagine Buildings 24. So that's Reimagine Buildings 24. We could not be more excited about that. About the event. It's March 7th and 8th, and the program has really come together. So it's chock full each hour, and we really hope that everybody will join us for it. It's going to be a lot of fun, and a cool way to cool opportunity to connect with people from around the world as well.
Great. All right. Well, thank you for that. And now let's jump into this week's feature interview. This is Ilka and Mary, your chat with Amanda Bonelli. We'll jump back in and have a chat afterwards. So I hope you enjoy this.
Hi, Amanda Bonelli. Welcome to the Passive House Accelerator podcast. You are an architect, a CPHC, and an associate at Bright Common in Philadelphia. So, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Hi, Ilka. Yes, I'm very happy to be here today. A little bit about myself. I was raised in New York by parents who always supported art and generally the arts. My mother is an incredible drawer and painter, and I was exposed to that from the time I was very young, since I was able to hold a drawing implement. So I've always drawn, and my drawing has always been fostered by my parents, or was always fostered by my parents. I seriously considered an education in fine arts. However, my father is an entrepreneur and a small business owner, and he works with architects every day. And so I was always around plans and architectural drawings growing up. And I love the technical aspect of that. So I pursued an architecture degree, still drew, and I knew leaving school or leaving undergrad that I needed to land at an architecture studio where being able to physically draw as a thinking mechanism was valued and more so was expected. So I was also attracted to smaller studios where I could be involved in a little bit of everything. And that comes from just my father as a business owner, seeing that sort of small business energy. I was around it my whole sort of childhood, and I loved it. So Bright Common sort of checked the we value drawing box and also the small business box. They had the added bonus of working locally on local projects and developing relationships with organizations, builders, artists within the community. And that became more and more important to me in school, knowing a locality or a region well and designing specifically for that place. So that's a little bit about kind of how I landed where I did. On top of that, Bright Common brought this cool environmental equity lens that intrigued me beyond standard solar panels and trome walls, which was largely my exposure in undergrad. I happened to have Jeremy Abolino, the studio director, as a professor in school, and I maintained a relationship with him. We worked together while I was still in school, and just like that, time's flown. I've been at Bright Common for around 8.5 years now, and have really grown with them as our work here has grown. So it's been an incredible learning experience for me, and I'm happy to be here.
That's great to land at a firm where you're so happy to be there that you stayed there the entire time since you graduated. So that's wonderful. You recently presented at the Passive House Accelerator Live Next In event. Can you tell us a little bit about that presentation for those in our audience who might have missed it?
Yes. So I presented a project that is just kicking off construction. It's called La Marceline, and it is a mixed-use development in the Fishtown neighborhood of Philadelphia. One thing about Bright Common is a lot of our work is within walking distance of our studio, this being no exception. So it's about a 20-minute walk from where we practice. There are 16 residential units and 1 commercial space in the development. It's just around 20,000 square feet. And this project, it was our first time working with this team, both the developer and the builder. And the presentation was a walkthrough of how we, as a holistic team, that's architect, builder, owner, consultants, evolved our thinking and processes surrounding high performance design, coming out of a very sort of mercurial 2020. Essentially, there were major fluctuations in material availability, material cost, labor cost, when this project went through initial pricing during early design development. So we had to reevaluate a lot of our decisions and pretty much be more adaptable, much faster. So at Bright Common, we spent a lot of time digging through the study done by New Frameworks involving embodied carbon of a multifamily project in Boston, sort of a similarly scaled city and building typology. And we went back to the drawing board on our end. We presented a better version of Le Marceline to the owner and development team that looked at embodied carbon first, that presented a menu of assembly options that would meet energy targets and fire ratings and sort of was adaptable in that fluctuating material and cost market. And then we simplified a lot. We simplified exterior materials, the building form, and it represents to us a major success story because it is being built. There's a hole in the ground. It's all electric with a rooftop solar array, a green roof, heat pump technology, ERVs. We have wood framed walls with wood sheathing and cellulosic insulation. So, I guess from our kind of design process standpoint, it was the first time that we as a studio calculated embodied carbon numbers for a project. And we continue to fine tune what that process looks like for us, what numbers we present, when we present them, sort of how detailed those metrics are. And one thing that was cool was, and I shared this during my talk, the owner developer recently sent us a link to a wood fiber insulation that's being manufactured in the United States. And he asked, is this worth exploring for Le Marceline? Can we use it for Le Mar? And I think why that excited us was that he gets it. They got it. It wasn't us pitching an idea that was not understood by the folks that we're working with. And so it's one project that initially we were looking at sort of full passive house certification for. And then in our climate, we've had to change our game a little bit, but we're still very excited about sort of what we learned in the process and where we're landing together as a design team.
Yeah, this is really great to hear. And it also shows how perspectives and focuses have changed over the last 8 years. I feel like I probably have known you for almost all the 8 years, right? Or close to that. One thing I wanted to go back really quickly is that I didn't know that your background or your family background is so art-centered on your mom's side. And now it all makes sense because we always say Amanda's drawings are the most beautiful. Whenever we get drawings from you, we're always like, these are laid out so well. So, and the other thing, just going through the past how many years, it's also interesting, you know, you're bringing up the client actually bringing up wood fiber insulation, because I know in projects that we've worked together on, we've had challenges getting people on board, clients on board with wood fiber insulation. So it's really nice to hear that has changed. What I'm curious about, and you're talking now that you were very focused on the embodied carbon and the embodied carbon calculation on this project. I'm curious how your design perspective towards sustainable design has changed over the years? Because I know at some point we're really focused on passive house and the energy modeling, and then now you're focused on the embodied carbon. So I feel like things have shifted over the years. How would you describe that?
It's probably easiest for me to break down at least how Bright Common has grew. And I've been here since graduation. So I've sort of grown alongside the studio. So I think when I first joined the team, we were doing predominantly retrofits of existing building shells in Philly. And at that point, we were developing a process for deep energy retrofits, right? And that's implementing what we say science-based analysis of materials and systems to create thermally comfortable, energy efficient homes. And we had embraced passive house standards as a metric to evaluate our work and really started cutting our teeth in retrofit land. And then we began to grow and started working on new construction projects, also in the city, also infill construction. And we learned a lot of lessons about scaling those retrofit principles to larger new construction work. And this is when we first had a taste and frankly became more educated on embodied carbon. We had our first FIAS Plus Source Zero energy project certified, which used wood-based assemblies, hulls round. Ilka, you were part of that team with me.
Yes.
And currently, our largest commercial project to date is just about to begin construction. Funny enough, that project is a retrofit. We're coming back sort of full circle to our roots. And it's in an existing mill building in the Manayunk neighborhood of Philadelphia, which is within the floodplain. It's right on the banks of the Schuylkill River. It's on the Register of Historic Places, and it's modeled to use half of the embodied carbon of comparable new construction projects. And it's a representation of sort of everything that we've learned from day one, just scaled up. So I think what's been pretty rewarding is, and a very special moment to be a part of, a growing practice where the values that were important to us from the beginning are still true, and we're still practicing that way where we can. And I think just because a lot of our work is in the city, we have developed the lens of designing within a specific region, within the complexities of a very specific urban environment with its regulations, markets, labor forces, and that has also shaped a lot of our thinking. So I'd say the principles from day one haven't changed. We're constantly figuring out how to implement those at different scales with different construction crews, how to still kind of, for more or less, pitch our expertise to project teams that may or may not have a background in the work that we do and are on a very different sort of place as to what they understand as sustainable and what we understand as sustainable. And all I can say is that, and what I've learned is that with every client, we have to have a conversation. And from the beginning, what we try to outline is, here's our expertise, here's our lens. Even if we don't achieve certification, here's what we think, where are you at? And what we have found working locally where we are fostering long-term relationships is that we have to have these conversations and keep having them early. And what's often the case is that we're on different levels of understanding. They listen to us, we listen to them, and we have seen change come from that. And I'll just give one example. We've worked with one builder in Philly for a very long time, since maybe 2014 or so, so almost 10 years. And our early projects with them were single family, new construction homes, electric and gas, infill lots in Philly. And that was from about 2014 to 2018. We built a few of those. We kept talking about what we valued. And then they built our first zero energy ready home, all electric. It achieved 0.27 ACH 50 back in 2018. And currently we are finishing construction documents for 2 FIAS core prescriptive projects that they will be building in 2023. And it's rare that a client or a builder will be on the same page as us. It happens sometimes, and it's the best, but that never means that the energy and the effort, talking and listening, sharing where you're at, is not worth it, or that entity won't get there. I've seen just too many successes, and I've learned the most in my life from people who have done that for me, at least sort of kept listening, kept telling me where they come from. This is what I stand for. Here's why, given me time, kind of not given up. So that's just been really fruitful, working locally with people that we want to keep working with, and that we never see as sort of one-off projects, but long-term relationships.
That's great to kind of be able to carry along these relationships and have both of you grow from them. And I really want to go back and hear more about the deep energy retrofit project that you're working on, because retrofits are really my passion. I'm so interested to hear who the client is, what the use of this building is that you're, and how you're approaching the retrofit. Is it from the inside or from the outside? What are you doing?
Yes. So Mary, my colleague, Jordan Mrazek, who is another associate here, he's leading that project, and I will tell you as best I can. I'll give you my understanding of it. But the way I would describe it is, like I had mentioned, a much bigger version of a home, more or less, right? It's the same principles as far as making sure that we have an airtight jacket, making sure that it's properly insulated, and doing what we can to wind tight the structure and all those things to get our systems down. The difference with this one is that it's for actually a local church who will be inhabiting it. And so it's not folks who are using it all the time. And like I had mentioned, it's in a really, I'll just say there's a lot of design constraints that have made it a challenge. So the first is that it's on the historic register, which means that the outside of it needs to pretty much look like we didn't touch it. And what that means is insulating, air tighting, wind tighting from the interior. And how we're choosing to do that is, again, with wood-based or wood fiber-based or cellulosic material. So it's mostly cellulose insulation. And then we have all of our wonderful air barriers and tapes connecting walls to roofs and so on and so forth. The ground floor needs to be more or less, because it's in a flood zone, it can't have any program that can get wet, and it can only be used really for parking and general gathering without having any type of electric equipment, plumbing, really conditioned space. So it happens to be a little bit of a difficult one because we're using it for parking. And then the church itself is actually on the second floor. So it's a 2-story building. You enter either through the parking lot if you're driving, or through sort of this wonderful side yard entry forecourt that we have towards the back of the building where you see a view of the river, and then you go up. And what that means is that we have a really tricky to detail kind of undercarriage condition between the parking area and then the sanctuary or the program space. And we have a bunch of steel beams, a bunch of wood, every type of structure. Concrete is sort of poking through that plane. And we've just had to get creative with certain types of thermal blocks, right? Or that's not the correct term, but insulative materials that break that cold parking garage from the warm interior environment. So we have, those systems in place. We're doing assembly modeling right now, to just more specifically look at a few conditions that we have concerns for. And then, as is always the case, we are going through right now a sort of cost engineering exercise where we're looking at ways to still achieve the insulatory metrics, the air tightness metrics, but with potentially sort of different options. And what's been wonderfully successful about this one is that from day one, we've been working with the general contractor and obviously the owner who've been on board with a lot of the things that I was just discussing. So the great thing is the cost sort of exercises aren't skinning the walls and leaving them exposed, which the historic folks would prefer us to do. But as a team, we're all on the same page as far as the church is going to hold on to this building for a long time. They want it to be comfortable. They want the systems to be sized smaller, right? So that's off the table as far as sort of cost engineering exercises. What we continue to see in Philly, especially sort of infill retrofit conditions, is that once we start actually going into construction and poking holes and getting rid of furring, is that there will always be our drawings cannot capture the litany of existing conditions that we have to sort of think through as a team. So it will be good because this team is good. And we have continued to hone our skills over the past 10, 12 years in this type of work. So, we feel excited and supported by the people that we're working with. And yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of growing pains, but also learning opportunities. And we just have a good team for it. That is not often, or that's not always the case. So that's pretty huge for this one, especially.
So I have a question about the financing, because we actually just did a podcast interview about financing and tax credits. Can you take advantage of the historic tax credit with this project?
I don't know, Ilka. What I know is that there was a local historic review and a national review. And we chose to defer the national review because what they would have required was us to get rid of all of our energy targets, more or less. And I just can't recall if we pursued local tax credit, or if you need to do both of them in order to get the funds.
No, and that's actually my next question, because we've done historic tax credit projects, and it definitely prevented us from doing better energy performing buildings, because certain walls or certain parts of the buildings just had to stay exposed according to historic. And it's kind of interesting how that works against each other sometimes.
They have good intentions. I do believe that, but then how that actually manifests into projects and, actual things working on the ground, there is a huge disconnect. So it didn't make sense for this one.
Mm-hmm.
It has in the past, but these guys were, it was a bucket of money that wasn't worth it for their long-term goals.
Yeah, interesting. So you're talking about this project is in a very specific neighborhood in Philadelphia, in Manayunk, but you're also working a lot in Fishtown, for example. The other project that you just referred to is in Fishtown. So can you tell us a little bit more about these very much Philly neighborhoods in terms of how, the fabric of the housing is laid out and how that works here?
Interestingly, so our studio is in it's very close to Fishtown. It's considered maybe East Kensington, but the row homes that are around us are flat faced. So generally it's a brick wall that rides all the way up. You have a stoop, but there's not much push and pull on the front facades. Once you move to West Philly, for example, or even South Philadelphia, you're introduced to porch culture. And this adds a degree of not only depth, but sort of social interaction that is startlingly different walking down the streets in those neighborhoods compared to Fishtown. And beyond that, there's every version of the row home in between. So there's sort of twins that are connected by a party wall and have side yards that are open and free to the air and allow windows. That's more sort of towards the outskirts of the city. But most of our work, as I'd mentioned, is what's called infill construction. And that is in lots that are within a city block. And we typically build from party wall to party wall. So that gives you window or light opportunities on the front and the rear only. But what we've found is there's such a stark contrast in just the way that buildings look and the communities function. And that's represented in the way that, those row homes present themselves to the street, that it's never, ever a sort of a copy paste for us. We're always visiting the site, seeing what's around it, seeing what has worked in the past or what's sort of traditional for that region or that neighborhood, and then sort of putting our own spin on things. One thing that's interesting, though, when you're working on projects that are within your city, and Ilka, you might have found this as well, working in Philly, is that there is an innate drive in you to design them well because they will be making up the fabric of your life. And we want to be designing our best for the community that we live in. And the best means, the lessons that we're learning, the research that we're doing, the studies that we're reading. So, and more or less, I personally want to be able to walk by a project that we've worked on and be really proud of it. And that goes beyond just capital A architecture or the way that it looks. There is beauty in that, of course, but it's not just that. It's what makes up the building, right? It's like, are the people inside breathing fresh air? Are the materials that make up the assemblies healthy? And I think that's one thing that's been kind of a wonderful takeaway about retrofit work is you get what you get on the outside. And generally it looks how it looks. You can dress it up with paint or repoint brick or add some lights or an awning, but it's usually never about the outside. It's about what we can do to sort of make the interior experience best for the folks who are going to be using it every day. And that's a lesson that I didn't learn in school at all. It was always, what do you see when you're walking across the street, right? What's the first glimpse of the building? Is it dynamic? Is it, I don't know, impressive? And at least at Bright Common, our practice is just, it's beyond that. There's so many degrees of what successful and beautiful architecture can be. And that's why I love, every day here in the studio is different as far as us working on retrofits, us working on new construction. The variety reminds me again that there is variety in beauty. And that's one thing that I never would have thought coming out of architecture school, is that sort of like an average looking, sort of like you walk past it, it doesn't elicit a strong emotional response from you type of building is still worth it. It's still worth investing time and energy into, and sort of reintroducing it back to the fabric of the city, if it's already here. And that marries back to kind of the embodied carbon approach, is that the best buildings are the ones that already exist. So, and we have so many of those shells in Philly that it's just imperative that we don't tear those down, that we use what's already here.
I love that, because that's part of the reason that I love retrofits. I mean, there's the complication aspects, because there's always puzzles to solve, but also the idea of, getting a building to be performing so much better and lasting so much longer. But also talking about successful and beautiful. I was just not too long ago at the FIASCON conference in Houston, and one of the projects you worked on won an award there. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. So that would be Red Clay Passive, which is located in Kennett Square, Pennsylvania. It is generally described as sort of the heart of Pennsylvania's mushroom producing region. It's about an hour outside of Philly. And the site in its past life was a farm. And it was really important for the owners from the beginning to maintain that tradition of homesteading and imagine the site for future generations, for their family. So from day one, there was a need for longevity and resiliency that they were telling us, the first time that we sat across the table from them. That included, very easily passive house construction. And then independent of that, also on-site renewable energy, on-site water reuse. There's a sort of a giant sunken cistern that you'd never know, sunken into the hill there. Planting areas for food generation. So it was a holistic lens that just made the way that we practice really not even a sell to these guys. They were on board from the beginning. The site, unlike Philadelphia, which is mostly flat infill properties, it's steep there, and there was very strict steep slope and stormwater management regulations, which we had to design around. There was also sort of a great, many trees, and we didn't want to take any of those down. We did end up removing some that were non-native to the area and replanted native trees. But along with steep slope regulations, stormwater management regulations, tree canopy, the house was very clearly meant to be in one place, which was where the old farmhouse was located. So, way back when, they had figured it out already. And what was special about this project for us is that we utilized a modular wall and roof system to advance the project's goals of low embodied carbon construction. And that's the Holzraum system. And those assemblies are composed of all natural wood-based materials to not only reduce carbon use, but to promote a healthy interior environment. And these assemblies greatly reduced on-site waste, allowed for quicker installation by the contractors, and minimized disruption to the sort of existing hillside, while also limiting the complexities of on-site air sealing. All the windows came installed, and that's a pretty big feat. And what we also love is that the panels were fabricated in a factory that was within 70 miles of the site in Baltimore, and that allowed for factory-controlled precision. This project, we had, as I mentioned, the owners, the builder, consultant, energy modeler, energy rater, pretty much the team on day one, because it took the expertise of all of us to pull it off. And we learned a lot. Builder learned a lot. It was one of our first times working with sort of an energy modeler, and then a sort of a third-party verifier. So it's an extreme, success story again for us. I'm happy to run through all the sort of the metrics, but I can also sort of punt people towards our website, and they can check out Red Clay Passive in person. But it was the first time that we had a touch of modular construction and how technology really interfaces with high performance. Up until then, we had done stick builds, and that's mostly because the sort of Philadelphia market provides, I'll say, just cheaper cost for that type of build. And what we're finding, that project was completed, I want to say, during COVID. So within the past few years. And what we've at least seen in Philly is the sort of rise of modular or prefabricated construction at least I've seen it over the past 5 years, especially with larger projects where land cost is high and folks want to get people into their building as quickly as they can. So that was my first time that I at least experienced the interface of those two things and realized that that needs to be planned from the beginning. And what's great was the owners sort of were on board for that as well. So there was really nothing that we said or conversations that we had or ideas that they weren't open to. And they often pushed us as well. So it's a great one. And as I mentioned, it was being built during COVID, which was tough because, the factory shut down at one point and there were delays, right? And it wasn't the ideal time to be building anything, but we achieved certification, and more so the homeowners are now living there and sort of starting their sort of phase of homesteading and things like that. So we're happy that we all came through that, and we all still communicate together and still have good relationships with the owner and the builder and everybody else on board that team.
So yeah, I mean, I was lucky enough to be on that team, right? So which was really, really great. And that was actually, I think, only our third project that we did with Blueprint Robotics was the factory. And yeah, it was pretty interesting to do that during the pandemic. I agree with that. And one thing is that we just weren't allowed to really go on site much either, right? And even doing blower door testing and all of that, it's basically we're watching it from home.
The great thing was the homeowner, when the home was being constructed, him and his partner were living close to that property. And he would regularly go over there. He had a great version of the iPhone at that time and would just drop close to daily photos of the construction site onto Google Drive. So that's how we caught a lot of things or talked through certain, moments where we needed to, what we drew wasn't sort of coming to fruition in the field because it couldn't. So luckily the homeowner sort of was our eyes in the field, and we appreciated that. Again, it's not a 15-minute walk for us as well, so it would have been a drive. But yeah, very thankful for the homeowner being there and making sure that we were reviewing things according to what we had designed, and making sure that giving the project, I guess, the best chance of not only achieving certification, but being the best version of itself, making sure that we had everything taped up and sealed correctly and insulated correctly and all those things.
Yeah, and talking about the homeowner, the interesting thing too was that he was actually the MEP engineer, right? So
Yes.
all the system design actually came from him, including modeling, like the 3D modeling of the systems. And I think what was interesting for me is that he was so into the systems, the geothermal systems, and that we were able to use, for example, a pretty intensive geothermal system that he was very attached to and financially maybe was not the most cost-effective way of doing this. So we got to play around with equipment and systems that we usually don't necessarily get a chance to do. So
yes. Ilka, I'm happy you brought that up, because to your point, it's not something that we would have necessarily brought to the homeowner or even said, here's what we've seen before, or here's what we recommend. It was important to them. And so we worked it into design, and especially you as the modeler did a lot of that coordination with the homeowner. But it is a good example of, we're designing homes for the people who live in them, and they have their needs and the things that they don't necessarily want to cut back. And so those are always conversations. Does it make sense? It might not be what we recommend, but why do they want it? And then can we make it work? Or is it really going to throw things off balance, in the energy model or day-to-day life? So this didn't happen to fall into that category, which was good.
So just to wrap up, what are the sort of next challenges you're facing on the horizon, or next exciting projects? Is there something that you're currently working on that you want to talk about a little bit?
So right now, I am, as I mentioned, our work is pretty varied. Retrofits, new construction, single family, new construction, mixed use, multifamily. Similarly, our clients vary wildly. So we're currently working with, I want to say, 3 community neighborhood organizations, a local church, a litany of Philadelphia developers, private homeowners. And right now I'm overseeing construction on a few projects. So Lamar Lane, which is that mixed use project I discussed earlier in the Fishtown neighborhood of Philadelphia. We're also overseeing construction of 40 units of scattered site affordable housing units for a few Philadelphia community organizations, some in the Mantua neighborhood of Philadelphia, which is in West Philadelphia, some in North Square, which is close to our office. And also I'm leading design and documentation for a FIAS core prescriptive passive house in Philadelphia that is hoping to start construction in 2024. Beyond that, there's always a lot of variety of work lined up, and our days are always different. There tends to be a healthy portion of projects in schematic design, in feasibility, in construction, and the team of people that make up Bright Common is key. And we happen to have a lot of strengths that play off each other, and we fill in the holes with our weaknesses. So we're just looking forward to hopefully doing this work and fully continuing to do this work in Philly, to keep having conversations with new partners and to provide our expertise in an accessible way. That's always our hope.
Well, I'm excited to see more, whatever comes next.
And that was Amanda Bonelli. Great chat there. Ilka, firstly to you, you've obviously done a bit of work with Amanda. What was the highlights there for you?
Well, yeah, I mean, I definitely really enjoyed the talk with Amanda. I mean, we've worked together. I've known her for quite some time. I've known Bright Common for quite some time and the work that they're doing. And yeah, I thought there are a lot of really interesting topics that we talked about. But one thing that I just still remember standing out for me is that she says there is variety in beauty. I feel like that says so much about like how you approach your work, how you approach architecture, how you approach buildings, and that it doesn't have to be just the most, perceived beautiful or important buildings that need to be saved, that even the little row houses here in Philadelphia are worth saving because they mean something for the occupants. And yeah, that's something, even in Philadelphia, the typology of a row house is very, very prominent. I think there's 60% of the city's housing is actually row houses. And I feel it's just such an interesting building typology. And when you come to Philadelphia this year, at the end of the year, you'll be able to see.
Yes.
Yeah, to Fies. You'll be able to check them out. And there's all these different neighborhoods, and each neighborhood has a row house typology within itself. There are different sizes. There are really small row houses, and there are really, really large row houses as well, and dependent on where you are. So, it's just great because they're super energy efficient, and they really promote home ownership because if you can't afford the big row house, you might be able to afford a smaller one. So it's really, really great. One thing that I would like to mention is that we've had, when we started even with Bright Common, looking at row houses, even as an infill, as a passive house, it was always a little hard to actually model passive houses in Woofy, because the adiabatic walls weren't accounted for as envelope. And that made it really, really difficult to reach a reasonable target for performance, to reach certification. But that has changed. The new FIAS guidebook actually says that you can include those adiabatic walls as envelope. So this is great news. And I hope that we can do a lot more passive house row houses here. And there's actually a passive house row house manual that you can find on the Green Building United website.
Oh, great. We should put a link to that, Zach, in the show notes if we can, because I think a lot of people would be interested in that. It is a good form factor, as you mentioned, Ilka. And something that struck me, I was actually out on a walk listening to the interview and thinking about all of the kind of beauty in the ordinary that she was alluding to. I gathered it was a bit of attention for Amanda coming from a sort of more fine arts, that artistic perspective, and that perception that a lot of architects have of wanting to create a big splash and create something that stands out. But there's a lot of the beauty or a lot of the value of a good building comes from all the stuff that goes on inside, and that can happen, regardless of the look and a building doesn't necessarily have to stand out, particularly an existing one. It can quite well fit into the surroundings, but still either perform well or not perform well, and that can make all the difference to the occupants. Mary, what was your highlight?
Well, absolutely, it was the appreciation of diversity of beauty, but also just building a local fabric in her design practice, with her design practice, because, she works in the neighborhoods that are close to where all her projects are. And so that was great to really foster those long-term sustainability for the residents of the projects she's working on. And I love that. And of course, the value of retrofits is exciting.
Yeah.
To have that approach too.
Yeah. I'm glad you spoke up there and talked about your passion in that area. And she mentioned that common theme of the best buildings being the one that already exist, which is so true. And the other tension there is that one between heritage and energy efficiency, which often comes up and has some real challenges, particularly around funding or restrictions. And then you start to question, well, how much of our heritage do we want to keep? And how much is a good thing to keep if it's maybe has some sort of aesthetic appeal, but if it's really not performing, what value is that? And can you have both? Can you have the look and also have the energy efficiency? So, I think it's a global challenge, but it requires local understanding of the buildings and the aesthetic in that particular neighborhood. Zach, anything from you?
Well, one thing is I want to make a plug for the portion of the Reimagine Buildings 24 event that Nikita Reed will be presenting. She'll be looking at that, kind of examining that question about historic preservation and history and heritage, cultural heritage, and performance and decarbonization. So I'm really looking forward to that piece of the event. But I love this interview. I met Jeremy Avellino of Bright Common in 2016 at the FIAS conference in Philadelphia there, and have been a fan of his work ever since. So it was really fun to learn about Amanda's work more specifically, and to hear about this ensemble of practitioners that have been growing together at that firm. And she mentioned at one point just how important that they knew that the project was going to be good because the team is good. And I think that is particularly true in retrofit work, where, clearly there's a lot of really careful planning and beautiful construction documents that are produced by the firm, but there's also the reality of, you have to make course changes in a retrofit. And even infill, you could think of infill as kind of a retrofit of a streetscape a little bit, because it is so connected with the buildings on either side with the party walls. So, you have this little bit of a jazz ensemble kind of improvisation thing that can make these projects really sing. And so that I think it's cool to see we're at a place now where kind of as in terms of the maturation of this community around Passive House, where we're seeing more and more offices that have that kind of capacity. So that was fun to hear about.
The one of the standouts for me, I think, was the general theme of changing the industry over a period of time, working with clients over a period of time. And Amanda mentioned kind of just talking about Passive House, talking about energy efficiency, and coming up from an environmental perspective that was more around solar panels and trombols back in the early days of her journey, but then also just keeping potential clients, potential builders on board, and keeping not chipping away so much, but just sharing their thoughts with them. And eventually those clients coming around, and now they're in this situation where they're doing full embodied carbon calculations, people asking them about passive house, people suggesting things like wood fiber insulation to them. And I think that's a really good reminder that while it might seem like an uphill battle, if you keep kind of talking about these things and keeping people on board, eventually, we hope they'll come around and start to want those things or realise that they're very desirable in their projects. So I thought that was an interesting evolution that they've experienced as a practice, but also doing their part to help influence the people that they work with, including clients and builders. Ilka and Mary, did you want to close off with anything?
Well, I think kind of continuing what you're saying, even as a firm, that I think it's great to see that you can shift focus and that you can kind of learn from what you've done, that you don't have to be stuck with one specific, certification goal or specific material, or, that you can just learn from what you've done and learn from others and see what the market is like now and then react to that. So we're always trying to do our best, right? So, just, doing the best you can at this point and what's possible at this moment, I think is great. And I feel like Amanda kind of showed that they're very capable of shifting and growing with everyone around them.
Yep. Great. And Mary?
Yes, just the long-term relationships, bringing sustainability along with those long-term relationships and building up that base of understanding within their community. Again, it's all about, for her, local practice and fostering that.
Nice. Hey, well, thank you, Ilka and Mary. Really enjoyed that. Great way to get things going into the new year. Zach, what else we got coming up on the accelerator?
Well, Passive House Accelerator Live programs are kicking off again for 2024. And so this week on January 10th, we're joined by Elizabeth Boudinot of CarbonWise, and she'll be presenting about Beyond Efficiency, unveiling the embodied carbon challenge in low carbon construction. And Elizabeth is also a interviewee of Ilka's and Mary's on an upcoming episode, right? We're in a few weeks.
Awesome.
Yeah, so that'll be great. And of course, don't forget to register for Reimagine Buildings 24. We'll have a link in show notes for that as well. That's March 7th and 8th.
Great. All right. Thank you, everyone. Great to see you again. And we'll be back again next week on Passive House Podcast.